Hey guys, how are you tonight? I'm Mike. I'm here with Tom. It's that way. I finally figured out which direction this camera actually points. It is the opposite of. So, like throughout this thing, I'm sitting here and I think I want to turn my head this way, but I keep turning it that way. So anyway, sorry. Hi guys, that was me just ranting about, and I think my dog just started having a freak out in the background. It's 2020, people. We're just making stuff up as we go. So we're doing these Facebook Lives to talk about the sessions that we've had at the conference, and then sort of to pivot off of them and talk about other things related to what came up in the session. And Tom did a session about fixing consultations, and actually I wanted to pull up the slide that was at the end of that, Tom, which we'll do at some point and talk through that because it's really interesting. But I wanted to remind everybody who's watching, you can put questions and comments below. If you don't know Tom, he's sort of a ninja on things like automation and trying to systematize stuff so that you're not doing it all yourself. Actually, Tom, you guys, LawDroid is the name of the company that creates the bots, right? And
yeah, that's right.
What got you into that stuff?
Well, rewinding, I mean, the initial... I've always been into technology, so I've always loved that and mixing it with my practice to try to make things easier.
Right.
But I think the very first, impulse to start LawDroid had to do with seeing Joshua Browder and what he was doing.
For those who don't know Josh Browder, tell them about his work.
Yeah, so just about 4 years ago, he launched Do Not Pay, which was a chatbot in London that was helping people to get out of parking tickets. And it sounds silly, but when I read that news story, just doing my research every day, I came by that and the hair on my arms stood up because I was thinking to myself, this is really going to change everything. The ability to automate that kind of, conversations and tasks and things like that.
Yeah, and the Do Not Pay one, for you guys who don't know, and I would, by the way, Joshua will say this to you, nothing that he has created has been perfect. And I've heard different criticisms for things that he's created, from multiple people, and I get it, right? Like if you're a lawyer and you're looking at these sort of just good enough solutions, they're not as good, right? And I think we can talk about that a little bit. What kind of lawyer is it okay to do good enough law for? Because that's not true for every lawyer. You start doing good enough law and you're putting yourself out as an expert, you're in trouble. Boy, I can't remember who it was I was talking to now that said you can't be both McDonald's and Ruth's Chris, right? Like you can't go after all segments because one undermines the other. And so with that caveat, it's good enough, and he makes no bones about that. But the original tool was to say you didn't want to pay your ticket, you had to object. You had to raise your hand and say, I'm not going to do this. Or it just went through, I assume, as a default. And so, but it was a pain in the butt process that nobody knew. Did they need a lawyer for? What am I supposed to do with this? And so he created a bot. Which you can describe it to us, but I'm going to describe as just a form that you're filling out that asks you things as you go along, and it's got some decision tree function, but you'll clarify that. But it kicked out a document that they could file with court. The courts got so pissed. It was awesome because all these people were like saying, I'm not going to pay that. And he's now expanded. I mean, he's trying to do family law. He was doing stuff around the Equifax breach, making it really quick to apply for compensation for the Equifax breach for this thing. I think they just released something that was applying for PPP loans or something. If you're putting information in, it'll automatically move it over. So with all that said, knowing that that's what these tools are trying to do is a good enough version of done, briefly tell me how does the science work? What makes these things work? Is form a decent way to refer to it?
I don't mind referring to it as a form. I think it's definitely more engaging than a static form on a website. I'm a big fan of not letting perfect be the enemy of the good, and I think that is a big roadblock sometimes. with,
So Google has like I think Google has a forms tool, right? Like, so when you say static site versus a bot, what you mean is, correct me if I'm wrong, is like Google form you can put up on your site, or Community Lawyer will do this where you can build one that's like a macro where you're sort of tiering in these questions. And I'm sitting there as the user, I'm filling stuff, first name, last name, town, what color's your hair, what's your dog's first name, and it's populating out a form, just using macros, using stuff that worked on Microsoft Word 20 years ago. Right. But a bot, the distinction is it's more natural language, right? Like it's you're trying to talk to it and it's trying to talk to you, right?
It can be, but I think early on it got oversold as being like it's going to have human intelligence and it's going to be like Kit and Knight Rider talking to you and stuff like that. And which is too bad because Kit's awesome. Yeah. Right. But that overhype has kind of like gotten pulled back recently, like in the past couple of years, and people have understood the useful and practical applications that you could have with it. And I think what differentiates chatbots, or conversation, as we now refer to it, conversational UI, is that it's more engaging. Like we all live on our phone, we all like message each other, and basically conversational UI captures that way of communicating. And so when you're going to a site and you're seeing a static page, that's not communicating. That's like viewing a menu.
So like structurally, so I've got Erica on my phone. That is my Bank of America chatbot person. They call her Erica. They all have women's names. I'm sure there's some science behind that. And though Patbot, I guess, is gender ambiguous. Patrick. So I've got Erica on mine, and one experience to get my questions answered would be go to the help page, go look at the drop-down menus that say all the questions are pre-populated, and it's given me an answer or whatever. Where Erica, I can go on there, ask the exact same questions, but I'm not clicking around trying to find answers to 5 questions. Right? We humanize these things. She is telling me, I'm asking the exact same kind of question. And as long as it's linguistically similar to the FAQ, she's going to give me the form answer. Is that essentially the difference in the experience?
Yeah, I think the difference is, the static way is like, let's say on your floor you have a whole bunch of business cards that are just piled up from a conference you went to. You're trying to find John Doe, but where the heck are you going to find it in this pile of business cards? Now, if you had an assistant that was Johnny on the spot and knew exactly where everything was and filed it away, well, you say, hey, where's John Doe? How do I call him? Here's the card, right? It's that immediacy in terms of being engaged in the conversation, but it's also the ability to reach back into information and serve it up quickly.
So now I'm thinking about usefulness of these things, like what lawyers can do with these things. So if you guys are watching this, one of the things that we've talked about, that Tom and I talked about in his session, John Tobin and I talked about this a little bit too, how you can take your current knowledge. There's a lot of talk right now about, should I change practice areas? Should I start doing something totally different? What's my pivot look like? And one of the things that we've talked about is how to take your current knowledge and turn it into something that brings some kind of value that someone else will pay for. This is a cool option. I was talking to a lawyer friend of mine, and she was doing, I think you and I talked about this, she was doing sort of free 30-minute phone call-y consultations, but then she wanted to upsell them to something that wasn't $10,000 representation. Right. And so she and I are having this conversation, and I was like, I think you could create a chatbot that asks some questions and people can engage with, and then based on these answers, it can create a custom form that says, here's the advice, here's the stock, this is not customized advice, obviously you put waivers around this, but here's the stock advice based on the questions you asked. But there was a deliverable. I told her, if you did a COVID custody check for $99, that was going through a bot asking these questions and then kicking out a document that is semi-customized, right? It's obviously not you. It's not fully customized, but it's semi-customized. People will pay for that, right? And that is helpful. It's not just that they'll pay for that. That is actually good. Was my advice to her right? Is that like an option someone could actually do?
Oh yeah, I totally agree. And that's actually, as we talked about in the session, that's what we did for Patrick Palace. He has his Patbot on his website, and it asks a couple dozen, I think, workers' compensation questions. And when it does that, it triages the different legal issues. So there are, like if-then conditions, like it doesn't ask questions if certain things don't apply. And what you get at the end of it is a report that is customized to that specific person, gives them helpful self-help information, documents, links, all kinds of stuff. So I think the opportunities are, one, you could charge for that as a product. Right. Or number two, you could do it as a way of, building your own value and credibility with a potential client so that maybe they get all this self-help information and they're like, whoa, this is way too much. I'm going to hire you, Patrick Palace, because you're the expert in this. And you've already proven that to me by everything that I've gone through in this interview.
It's such an interesting thing because we've sort of always had that logic, right? Like you bring me, my dad always referred to it as dazzle him with BS, right? My dad is very encouraging of me, and he would always say, you're really dazzling with BS. But we did this thing as lawyers where we would try to, the expert gap was the thing that made people need us. And so the more I drive home, bro, there's a gap, right? You're not on my level. The more they would say, I will come and use you. This was the logic. But all kinds of consumer data that I cite in the book says that this is not true. What's pivoted is now people trust the experts who bridge the gap, right? Who purposely try to show you a path. And Patrick's, I should be clear, like Patrick is a good dude. He is not trying to confuse people so they'll have to hire him. Like just the way he's wired, he's fully content if somebody just gets their problem solved. But it does have that outcome, right? It does happen to move people to him that need him more.
Right. I mean, marketing has completely shifted, right? The whole approach has shifted where it's about putting value out there, being helpful. I kind of liken it to how chefs market themselves. Like if you watch any show where they're cooking, they're like, here's the recipe. Here's me cooking it. Here, you try it. It tastes fantastic. And that's, that's a way of putting the information out there, engaging people. And then they're like, oh my God, if I'm going to go eat that, I'm going to get it from that guy, if I can.
I have watched probably every Jamie Oliver recipe video, and I still buy all of his books. Even the book, I mentioned this in a Facebook Live the other day, the book 5 Ingredient Meals or whatever. He's got a YouTube channel that is those recipes, but live. Even though I had seen literally every recipe on these recorded things, I still went and bought the book, right? Because you get this connection, you want to support people. I do want to get for people practical. Your knowledge goes beyond that one solution. That was a solution that you figured out because you know the context because you run a practice, right? And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you do automations and intakes and stuff in your firm. Before we do, I just want to remind people, if you just talk on the thing below us, you can ask questions about automation tools, about how to get signed up for things, about what you're doing, what are you trying, how are you dealing with intakes differently. If you've stopped doing free consultations, which I've been banging that drum for years, tell us what you're doing instead. Super interesting stuff. So, Tom, you mentioned to me before we got on that you're using Clio Grow for intake, intake is a complicated word for this. Tell me about using Clio Grow for managing the pipeline of people coming in.
Yeah, so I think when you're trying to generate leads, you definitely need to be you definitely need to be organized about managing them. Because if you're not consistently following up and knowing where you are in terms of follow-up, then you might as well throw the lead away. Right. So Clio Grow has been fantastic for that process. Not only does it have like the Kanban where you know exactly which stage you're in, but you could put in reminders of when to follow up, and then the fact that it integrates with the contracts and you could just basically drag and drop a couple of things, send the contract out to be signed, and then lock in that client. It's pretty amazing. So yeah, that's what I use in my practice. And just to back up a second, yeah, I'm, in addition to having a legal tech company, a lawyer, and have been plugging away at this for just over 20 years. I have my own firm for over a dozen years. And I've always been passionate, obviously, about technology and what it could do to make things easier.
I'm sorry, while you're talking, my computer is humming again because I'm looking at a website while talking on Skype, and computers just do not like that. I was showing them just sort of Clio Grow's homepage a little bit. They have these GIFs, as I say them, or GIFs, as apparently the rest of the world says them, that are showing sort of how the process works. If you're not familiar with the Kanban board idea, it's basically that you've got these things organized in a time. So you can see the many Post-it notes behind me, right? You've got like vertical categories, and you're moving cards along them to try to show progress. And that's how Clio Grow is sort of organized. But if I can say I did not use Clio Grow because I stopped practicing before the thing came out. But so I didn't really. What's the right way to put this? Law firm targeted CRMs are not very good for referral-based businesses, which is hilarious for law firms. And I always had a hard time with law firm-specific CRMs, but since then I've seen what Clio Grow has done. I've seen what Lawmatics has done. I love Lawmatics' look. Like, if you never use Lawmatics, it's really cool the way it's built. Doesn't integrate with Clio very well. Obviously not as well as Clio Grow does, but I would look at both of those. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, automating the intake. James Hux is in the group, and he said, perfect timing. I just started using Zapier more, trying to get Google Drive and Temi, which is video transcription, to work well. So talk to me about sort of your workflow, your tech stack. As you're doing these integrations where things are talking to each other, are you creating your own tools to bridge those APIs, those different tools, or are you using, you mentioned you're using Clio and Clio Grow, so you're using some tools out of the box?
Yeah, for sure. I think Zapier is a great one for solos and small firm lawyers, because it's so readily accessible. It has so many integrations, and if you want to tie let's say your landing page, one that I use is Unbounce, right? That a lot of people might use that. Or even if you just have a form on your website, Gravity Forms or something like that, you can have it webhook into Zapier, and then you can have Zapier send out an email, right? So if you are not there to plug away at your computer immediately when somebody submits a form and say, thank you very much, and here's a link to my scheduler to set up an appointment, you could automate that in Zapier fairly quickly.
So just for the really not tech, what is Zapier? What is Zapier? Just describe what the tool does.
Yeah, so obviously now with the cloud, there are a plethora of different apps available that are web-based, right? And so you have your CRM, you have your accounting software, and you have just like a laundry list of different types of apps now. And the problem that came up is, how do you get them to communicate to each other?
Right.
How do you get to share information between your CRM or your lead management system and your accounting software? How do you get these things to talk to each other? So Zapier was the killer app that came out that its sole purpose is linking all of these different apps together and getting them to work well.
Right. And it took so much market share that a bunch of companies that had been siloed were like, we can't survive if we don't show up on Zapier to do these integrations. So for those of you who are too young to remember this, Tom and I are not, and there are some firms that still do this. It used to be you bought a company's full suite of highly customized to your firm. You're doing a list of tools that Lexis or whoever carried, And the only way to get all those things to talk to each other was they all had to be under one umbrella. They all had to work under one company. And so you're paying Lexus, in addition to paying them, umpteen $1,000 a month, you're paying them umpteen $1,000 just to get set up, right?
Right.
A lot of companies do this with Salesforce integration. Salesforce was really difficult to get to talk to other things initially, and so you're building Salesforce essentially custom. They have the ability to create a fully custom solution. So you're just paying a fortune just to get set up. Then there was this cloud moment where all these companies were like, I'm going to go take a piece of what Lexus does or a piece of what Salesforce does, and they were all separate. That sucked. All right. It was awesome because now I can pick which tools that I want, but also none of them talk to each other. So it was super annoying. And now Zapier does it. So I'm just going to show them the screen time real quick of, if you go on Zapier, you can do a search of integrations. So if you've got a tool, you can go on Zapier and you can see, does my tool that I'm using, so I've got Clio up, does my tool work with other things? And you can see here, this is just the very basic. There are 84 pages times 9 each of different tools that integrate with Clio via Zapier. And if you're a company like Clio, Clio wants to be a marketplace as well. And so they try to sort of do what Zapier does, but custom to them. So like Law Clerk, for example, will send data directly to Clio, but they don't do it via Zapier. But Zapier covers a lot of stuff, right? Like acuity scheduling is on here, like way more than even Clio could handle. So definitely look and see if those integrations work for you. The other thing I wanted to do, Tom, was look at the slide. So you won't be able to see this, but you might be able to get it on your computer or remember it. So Tom did a session about consultations, and I like talking about consultations because they're knowable, right? They're a level of difficulty and we do them often, and this is something we can build around. So Tom did this really cool thing where he went through all the different things that we're trying to do in a consultation, and he showed what takes a human, right? What can be automated. And it's just crazy the number of things when you look at what a consultation is aiming to do that you can move from people to different kinds of automations, right? And we talked about this too with Karen about Karen Skinner about once you figure out your workflow, I do this, then I do this, then I do this. You can take take each one of those steps in the workflow and say, this should go to this tool, this should go to that tool. So Tom, I wanted to ask you about some of these things that you identified as automatable and see what tools you're using. So for the purpose of gathering information, what are you using to automate that?
Well, for purposes of gathering information, I mean, use LawDroid is one way to do it, because you can put in all of the different questions that you have to ask, and then just send a link to the client, right? On your own time, fill this out, and basically they go through the question and answer session, and they provide that information. It webhooks back into us, and we get a detailed report of exactly what we need to know. But even if you're not going to use LawDroid, you could still use, a Gravity form that you just have a web page link to, and you send them that. But the idea is to put the burden of it, the time that it would take to fill it out, in the client's court when it's convenient for them, instead of holding that as part of your overall 2-hour consultation where you gather the information. Give it to them to do in their own time. And then when you speak to them, you have the benefit of all that. You're coming across as much more educated, intelligent about their situation, and not having to go through get into the weeds of the facts because you already know them.
Yeah, and I would put the umbrella over just about all of this, that a lot of these automatable things, LawDroid can help with that. So talk to Tom about that for sure. So, Tom mentioned some of the tools that you might have heard of before that can do that. So what about this determinability to pay? I'm fascinated by that because lawyers are actually sort of terrible at trying to guess. We did a whole session about value-based billing with Ed Kless, and value-based pricing, I should say. And one of the issues with that is figuring out what this is worth to somebody, and specifically their ability to pay. How are you automating that? Are you just asking income stats, or how are you figuring out whether they can afford you or not?
Yeah, I mean, some questions are intended to draw them out. Like if, some people charge for their consultations, for example, is just one way to qualify. So you might ask them, well, you might inform them that, these consultations, they cost a fee. They happen to be this. Is that something that's within your budget? If not, like, is there some other way that we can provide you with assistance? Like, is there, some other service you might be able to productize, like you mentioned, that would be something that they could afford, but maybe not the full-blown service. So there's just different.
And in the case of Pat, you mentioned in our session, in the case of Patrick, they do workers' comp stuff, and they actually created a tool that, for them, ability to pay means do they have a real case, basically, right? Because they're all contingency. So for them, they created a tool that basically figures out, is this case worth anything, right?
Right, exactly. And
and I was going to say, same with that determine cost thing. I'm assuming that using sort of the same structural question, and it sounds like most of this is not. This is how you're structuring questions in some of these tools about doing some Q&A stuff. So you can determine costs through this. Like, you can structure, if you have defined these stages cost X amount, if you follow Ed's process of figuring out, I know what the next stage is, I can price that with 3 different tiers of pricing. These kinds of questions can be automated and answer that for you too. You can set up a formula of if-thens where you say, if they've got kids, well, that adds this. If they're living in the same house, that changes it this way. If they've got, 401k, that's going to change it this way. You can create a bunch of these if-then statements that you guys are already doing in your head, right? It's not like these things aren't already happening.
Yeah, to take a step back from it for a second, though. I mean, the way this has traditionally been done is just through the consult, and the lawyer has it in his or her head, and then they're providing that kind of feedback to the client about what it might cost them.
Right.
And the thing is that consumers nowadays, I mean, we're accustomed to finding out pricing before we deal with, whoever the provider is. Like, we don't want to get, like, a lot of people feel uncomfortable getting caught in that conversation because they feel like they're going to be sold, and they rather have the freedom of figuring out what the pricing is, becoming comfortable with you before they even meet you, right? So instead of like going against the grain, it would really be helpful, because all the consumers are far ahead of us, to go with the flow. And with the flow is getting that information out there, and then letting them decide for themselves.
What's your practice area?
So probate is what.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard this. The complaint that I hear with Be That Transparent About Your Pricing is that some practice areas are easier to be transparent about than others. At least that's the argument. Probate, having done probate, probate can get as ugly as any other practice area, right? But the simple fact with probate is that most of the cases don't do that. Most of the cases, they have simplified processes. I can sit and price them out because I know 90% of the time it's going to go this way, and so I can productize that and turn that into something using knowledge products, using forms to fill out, things that automatically populate. I know I can go sell a certain kind of probate case for $1,500, and it only cost me $250 to do it, right? That's easy to do with probate. I would sort of, as somebody who did that with family law, I didn't figure it out perfectly. There were certainly cases that blew up, and I didn't have enough cases to spread that risk around all of the cases, but I'm not very sympathetic to, you can't do this in my practice area. If you can figure out how to do known costs in a family law case, you can figure it out anywhere.
I completely agree. If I talk to anyone that has that mindset for 5 minutes, I could convince them otherwise, that it can't be done in their practice area. Because I dealt with this myself through my own practice, and we actually flat feed a lot of things, and the way you do it is obvious. Like, you have a flat fee, but there's exceptions in there that deal with those edge cases
Right.
that do come up sometimes, where you're like, I'll do it for $1,500, but then you get, the frenetic, neurotic client that wants to call you up at 2 a.m. and pump you for information.
Fired. Fired.
Yeah, fired. Or in like a less extreme case, they're just asking you for a lot of service
Right.
when you didn't bank for that.
Yeah, and you can figure that structuring your prices across. But to get back to the things that you can automate in that, there are ways to do it that you can figure out the cost early. You mentioned some of these subjective things that I think are interesting. Actually, I should say you put solve a problem on there under objective and automated. I'm assuming what you mean by that is you can create a product that is fully automated that also solves a problem, something like do not pay or something. Is that what you meant by that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, so on the automated and subjective side, the stuff that seems softer, but they still want, the set expectations one is one that we've talked about a lot. I love that idea. How can you use these tools and these automations to set expectations for clients?
You just walk them through it. I mean, either it's sending out automate, like you could send out documents to describe your process is like the most simple way. Like, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. These are the stages. It could be that when you're providing that intake interview with a bot, let's say, that it is explaining to them how you work, so that when they come to talk to you, they're not going to have these outsized expectations, or if they do, they're not going to come talk to you. And that's that's kind of a blessing, because then you won't have to deal with a client that just has crazy expectations.
Are you using an automated email tool for that? Is that how you're sending out these communications?
So we do it in multiple different ways. One is through the chatbot. When they have the first contact, we're already setting expectations there about how we work, that it's remote, that we're going to do things by email and phone, and there filters out people that got to meet in person. I have to have that handshake. Well, can't do that, especially now.
Right.
We also do it through email, through like a drip campaign that kind of touches the clients throughout the relationship with us. So that is asking for things that we need, but at the same time setting expectations about what they should want in return. So I would recommend following up in different channels, because unless you're doing that, the message really isn't going to come through.
Yeah, I've used Active Campaign mostly for my email, for automated email stuff, and that I mean, you guys have all experienced this. As an aside, one of the most impactful talks that I've ever heard, which is really interesting because the guy sort of drives me crazy, was Gary Vaynerchuk spoke at Clio 3 years ago, I think. And one of the things that he just kept doing, he could not stop picking up his phone, right? Like every time he was making a point, he was like, they get on this thing, they use this. And he's talking about people. And he said, what's so fascinating is you get on this thing, you use this. And he keeps bringing up the phone. These activities that you're used to, right? Like me with Bank of America, or you with customer service with Amazon, or you download an ebook somewhere and sign up and it starts sending you emails. This course, right? Like you got some automations with not as many as I would have liked, because I didn't take the time to set them all up before I created all this madness. But there are some automations set up with this thing that if you sign up, you get this email.
Right.
Those are things that I know that they might seem kind of schmarmy to people, but it's what we all do. Like we experience it all the time. People like it. They don't like it for everything. The data from Clio that George shared shows that they don't like it for everything. But if they want a case update, they just want to know where their case is at. I am waiting for some genius lawyer to, the Domino's app, the thing that shows like it's in the oven, we're checking it, It's on its way, right? And it's just a visual and you just pick it up. Some genius lawyer is going to figure out how to turn that into a thing for clients just to pull up and get a quick status check. They like automations for that. They don't love automations for legal advice or for new consults either. They don't love that either, apparently. Which I find fascinating. So you guys remember, if you put comments and questions below, things that you want to ask Tom about automations, about consultations, how to turn them into a paid product, a way to get some money and not a thing that you're spending way too much time doing because they are a time suck. And I could rail on this all day. Make sure that you ask us questions about that because we love talking about it. You also put on here the subjective goal of relying on you, that the client wants to feel like they can rely on you. How do you automate that?
By being there, by providing credibility through explaining the process, by being there as, to be available and open to them, and by communicating that, because I think what happens traditionally is that it's just this, the lawyer is behind this wall, they're inaccessible, they're hard to find, and then by simply projecting that message that you're available, what your process is like through different channels, text, email, phone, that just by doing that, you could grow that feeling of them relying on you.
I remember I went to Clio again a couple years ago, and Nika Kabiri, who used to work at Avo, and she does consumer research, market research. Love Nika. She said from the stage, data shows that clients want you to text them. You need to be doing more texting to your clients. And my head almost exploded. I was like, no, you do not, right? You as an individual lawyer, what clients are expecting is that your law firm communicates with them. Sometimes they want that to be you, but a lot of times they just want a damn answer. And if you're the person who's the easiest way to get the answer, that's why they're calling you. If they thought they could get an answer, it might take some training, but if they thought they could get an answer another way, they'd go the other way, right? You get this cliche with the super paralegal all the time, right? The super paralegal knows all the answers, so the clients never call the lawyer. They all call the super paralegal because the lawyer doesn't know crap. You don't have to have a super paralegal for that. You can give them other ways to find answers. And get that connection that you're talking about. I think that's really useful. So are you using a text app with people? Like, are you doing automated texting as SMS as well as the bots and stuff?
Yeah, and I think that's another way that Zapier comes into play. If you have an account with Twilio, for example, very easy to set up. You get your credentials through Twilio, and then you can set up a Zap that lets your clients know, hey, we're going to have that phone call in an hour. Just wanted to let you know.
Yeah, Patrick, again, I talked to Jordan at Patrick's office, and he said that they were facing this thing where people kept calling about their check. They wanted to know when their check arrived for these workers' comp claims or whatever, and it was just taking up an insane amount of time and resources. And so they figured out an integration between Clio, like when somebody in the firm puts a comment on there that says, hey, we check received or whatever, that it will text people, which that's what they wanted, right? And that's fully automated. It added no work, and it took a ton of phone calls off of their plate.
Right.
And I think they used Twilio for that. I think they built that through Clio to Twilio, if I'm not wrong. But
yeah. And the thing is that I know that lawyers, we're all so busy doing the work that we do that we don't have the time to really step back and look at what we're doing and why we're doing it. And that's part of why we did this deconstructing the consultation, because it's getting that moment of clarity to look back and see, okay, these are all the things that constitute this consultation, or these are all the things that constitute writing a motion, right? And then what of those things can we make easier for ourselves by working smarter in automating some of those.
Yeah, and I would point, before asking you about where to get help with getting these things set up, but I would point to this top right side that Tom put on here, which is the human and the subjective stuff, and it's got to have a lawyer, right? Like there's just that right now anyway, these things really take a lawyer. Showing empathy, listening, determining motivation, establishing trust, and for the client side, feeling validated. Those things, if you take surveys of clients, I was reading a survey today. I'll have to find it about what clients want from their lawyers, and it's what's amazing about it is it doesn't really mention substantive knowledge at all. It's all about communication. It's about feeling heard. It's about feeling like, do they know my business? It's just amazing that all those top right things that we tend to sacrifice for those areas that can be automated, those are also the things that really piss people off.
Yeah.
I'm looking for that article while that pause was so you would keep talking so I could find that article. Just FYI.
I mean, I totally agree that we tend to focus too much on things that we think are valuable that aren't really in the wash. It's there's this principle of artificial intelligence which actually has to do with automating things that when automating things that seem to be complex, that require higher functioning, like logical things, you would think like humans would think, well, that would be more difficult for a computer to do. It's actually the easiest part. The harder part is to solve for balance or physical motion or all of these kind of tacit things that we take for granted. And so, yeah, you have to look at, focusing and becoming an expert in those things that computers can't do. And people don't want to turn to computers for that, for emoting, for like empathy, for being relying on someone else to be, the person you could go to solve a problem. I mean, that's where we can differentiate ourselves and be better counselors and people.
Yeah, there are extremes to take this to. People, you are not therapists. Please do not put that pressure on yourselves. You don't have to be available to people all the time. I had a lawyer tell me one time that she wants to be the hospice care worker of lawyers. She wants to be right there with people and on top of them all the time. And I was like, that's cool. Hospice care workers make $50,000 a year and only go through 2 years of school. That's a totally, like, you can do that. But you got to understand, emotional labor is not very highly compensated in this world, and there's a lot of history there that's really fascinating. If you read the book Counterproductive, there's a lot of racial and gendered history in that. It's sort of fascinating. But we don't pay for emotional labor very well, but clients still expect it. And so if you can find automatable ways to deliver a lot of the answer stuff, the solution stuff, people are happy to have that. And you can spend that energy on the emotional labor that's what they want. And you got to figure out how to price that, structure that pricing, right? Don't do it by billable hour. Oh, side note, other thing that is just got what's left of my hair up on edge is the Clio Legal Trends report. I talk about this in the book that always says, we're only billing 2 hours a day or whatever, and we're only collecting on 1.7 or whatever it is. This is a disaster. Our utilization rate is really low. And I'm like, no, it just means we're spending 6 hours doing uncompensated labor. That's not the same as we're not doing anything. Our utilization rate might actually be 100%. Like, we're probably, most lawyers, most solos that I know, and if you guys are watching, you know this, we're at 120%, right? We're at 130% utilization. We're working all bloody day. The fact that we're only getting paid for a couple has nothing to do with utilization rate. It has to do with whether we're pricing appropriately for the work that we're doing. And since we're billing hourly, we're only billing 2 hours a day because of what we've defined as billable work. But anyway, sorry, rant over. I did want to ask you, there's... You and I could probably get into, here are 5 fun automations that you can do to get your firm started. But frankly, that article already exists probably, and it would make for boring TV. So if if you were in this process and you were getting started, and I don't know if you guys do this, so this may be a softball question, but if you were getting started with, I want to automate as much as I can, as fast as I can to just get stuff off my plate. I'm at home. I've realized I had to lay off staff, right? Or I had to cancel subscriptions to services. I need to get things automated really fast. Where would you start? Is there somebody you would call? Are there starter paths that you would do right away? How would you get started with this?
Well, I mean, first off, I mean, anyone is welcome to reach out to me, and I have, the tech background, but also like being a lawyer and trying to meld the two things together to give them some insight as to what solutions I've used in the past. But I mean, I would start with, I think Zapier would actually be a good place to start, because the thing about that is it starts making you think about connections. What can I connect to what? And I think if you also step back and you write down the top 5 things that are the hardest to do and that you feel like you're getting the least benefit from, and then thinking to yourself, whether or not there's some way to put that into Zapier.
Right.
But those would be the most beneficial. And that's, frankly, that's usually what I do when I talk to a potential client, with my legal tech hat on. I talk to them to find out what are their biggest pain points. So you could either work with a developer, like me, or with other companies to figure out what your pain points are, or you could actually, think for yourself, like, what are these? And there might be ways that don't require buying apps, that don't require, spending thousands of dollars to produce, where you could find an off-the-shelf solution for it that might be good enough for you.
Right. Yeah, and I think I'd point you guys to the Maximum Lawyer podcast. They had an interview with Kelsey Brancher, I think is his last name, or Bratcher. Anyway, Kelsey. If you search Maximum Lawyer Kelsey, you'll see it. They do a lot of, his company does automations, right? They figure out these processes for automations. And so those episodes are good. Zapier, at last I used it frequently, they were doing like a Zap a day thing where they were going through and saying, here's a cool thing you can do. Here's a cool thing you can do. And like you said, just once you start thinking about that, once you start thinking structured that way, that's a really nice way to get some quick automated wins. Another one that has really changed my life is Calendly. And I guess that's an automation, right? Because you're taking that decision-making process of going back and forth about times for a call, and you're just putting it on somebody else's plate and they get to pick it. That's a really nice way to get you starting to think of what these things can do. So just, if you do nothing else today, if you have not set up Calendly or a similar call scheduling tool, just sign up for it. Promise in a week when it changes your life, you're going to come back and say, ooh, I need to find more ways to do that. Because that's what happens. So Tom, if somebody does want to get in touch with you and talk more about these automations and fixing consultations and stuff, what's the best way to reach out?
They're welcome to follow me on Twitter. It's @LawDroid. Or they could email me as well, tom@lawdroid.com. Of course, the website is lawdroid.com. We actually have a really great promotion right now where we're offering a chatbot free for 6 months. And then, it's in a very affordable price at $50 a month after that. So easy way to jump into some automation, check it out, see if it works for you. And
cool. Yeah, that 6-month deal is crazy. That's really good. And especially if you think of it mathematically, if I can take 5 phone calls off my plate that will still get somewhere that I want them to go, either to a solution or to a way to schedule a call with me or something, that's huge. So thank you for that.
Just on that note, one lawyer that signed up for us in this past week that we got up and going, just, like a chime came through today, his first lead that he got within a couple of days. So that's pretty awesome.
Nice. So I want to share with you guys real quick again if you go to the Lawyer Forward Facebook group and go to I think that's the left. See, it's different when I'm not doing an interview. Now I don't know if it's that way. Anyway, if you go to the left side of the screen on the Lawyer Forward page, you can hit the events button and you'll see all these different watch parties that we're doing and these sessions where we're talking to the speakers. Tomorrow, we've got Chris White talking about his rural firm and how they scaled that, and John Strohmeyer talking more about service stuff and what he learned from his hotel experience. And we'll probably just tell ridiculous stories because we're buddies. So make sure that you go on there and go into the event and say going. Tell the thing you're going, because then it will give you updates related to your specific event. So, Tom, with that, I appreciate you. Remember, guys, you can put questions below, even after this video. If you're watching this in the future, you can still put the questions below this. We will still get pinged. We can go back in and continue this conversation. You can continue it with each other, whatever you're trying with your consultations, with your automations. Take this crap off your plate. Thank you again, Tom, and we will see you guys next time.
Bye.